Hello everybody, Frank Valente here. So today we are going to talk about envelopes. What is an envelope? Well, the easiest way to think about it is just how do we strike the sound? How does the sound look? So we do this already in Western classical music. A staccato quarter note, a legato eighth note, a whole note. These are all different ways that we describe how the note sounds. And we notate it, and that's how it looks. But in computer music, we do something called an ASDR envelope. So let me just get an array, and here's our array. We're not going to do anything actually with it. I'm just going to use it to draw. So first thing we have is our attack, where we ramp up to some value. The next one is our sustain. Then our release, where we stay at a value, followed by our decay. So this is our classic ASDR envelope. So attack, sustain, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Decay, this is our and release. Attack, sustain, decay, release. ASDR. Cool. So, for our purposes, we don't really need to talk about the release, but the attack, sustain, and decay is very important. So, let's just set up a simple oscillator, 440. Let's multiply that by 0.5 and hear it in our headphones or our speakers. Okay, sounds great. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a new box. It's called our message box, and we are going to hit Command 2 or Control 2, and we get this little flag box. Perfect. That is going to go into our new object, which is called vLine tilde, which basically ramps up to a time. So there's two values that are important. The first value is the value that it outputs. So v1 equals value that is eventually output. And then our second one, our v2, equals our time in milliseconds. Okay, so say we want this value to go, our amplifier to go up to value of 0.5. Let's say I want to do it over the course of 2 seconds. So that's 2,000 milliseconds. How does that sound? Actually, let's look at it too. We'll bring up our O-scope because it's the best way for us to see our sounds. We'll move this up here, let it pass, turn this baby on, and let's see how it looks like. Now, notice how we don't have a way to turn off, but if we just change this value at the beginning to 0, and then click our flag again, there we go. So here we go. This is, in a sense, a very basic attack, sustain, and decay. But we can't change the values in real time like that. It would take too long. So how do we make a more complicated message to tell the computer to attack, sustain, and decay? Well, let's just do a very simple attack, decay. How does that look? Well, we attack a note, just like before. And then when we get to our value, we immediately decay. How does that look? Okay, so before I said there was two values. Now we're adding a third value. Our third value is time to wait in milliseconds. So this tells a command how long it needs to wait before it starts its command. So we can put multiple messages into a message box as long as we separate it by a comma. So let's start off with an attack of 0.7. And we want to do this, generally anything under 50 milliseconds is a good attack time. Let's call it 30 milliseconds. And then we put a comma, space. Now we want it to decay to nothing. So that would be our value 1, which is 0. We want it to decay to nothing, which is, that's a 0. And then we want to do that in an appropriate amount of time. Decay can be anywhere from 50 milliseconds to seemingly infinite, but then you wouldn't really decay, it would just decay for infinity. So let's just call it 500 milliseconds, a half a second. Now we have to wait to send this value, this decay of 500 milliseconds, because we don't want it to decay as soon as we're ramping up. So what we're going to do is we're going to delay this message 30 seconds. Just to go over it again, so we're ramping up to 0.7 in 30 seconds. After waiting 30 milliseconds, we're going to decay for 500 milliseconds, or half a second. How does that look? So now we have some shape to our sound. What if we used our metro object from the first lesson, and let's just call it 600 milliseconds. Remember, this needs a toggle and an argument. How you can start to see how we can start to automate things. So in essence, what we just did was make a little metronome for 600 milliseconds. What else can this V-line object be used for? Well, we could actually use this V-line object, let's move this over here, to control pitch. So say we have 440 in 30 seconds, or 30 milliseconds, and we want to ramp down to 220 in 500 milliseconds. Again, after waiting 30 seconds. So these time values are the same, but the output is different because we're outputting hertz. What if we hooked that up to the oscillator? How would that sound? And let's trigger this at the same time. So, what we got now is this kind of police siren effect by matching the envelope, which is what we call this thing that shapes sound, and what we can call this thing that shapes sound. Even though this is controlling hertz and this is controlling amplitude, they're both envelopes because it's telling us to get to a value in a certain amount of time. So let's just end with a more complicated envelope. So this envelope is going to do our attack, sustain, and delay. So we're going to attack the note, decay, sustain, and release it. There we go. So how do we get that shape? Alright, we already have it started. So let's keep it at 0.7. So now we need to decay the sound. So let's call that 0.5. We have to do that in an amount of time. So let's call it 30 seconds. Now, like before, we have to wait 30 seconds. Perfect. Now we need to sustain it. We want to sustain this for, 100 milliseconds. So let's keep it at 0.5. We don't change the amplitude if we're sustaining it. Let's keep it there for 100 milliseconds. Now, we can't just wait 30 seconds. We have to actually wait 60 seconds because we have to add all the times up from everything before it. Every message before it, we have to add up all the time. So we're waiting an additional 60 milliseconds. Sorry if I keep saying seconds. Just know that I mean milliseconds. Finally, we need a decay time. Let's make it 300. But how long do we have to wait? We have to wait 30 milliseconds, plus another 30 milliseconds, plus 100 milliseconds, which is 160. And if this is right, we should hear. Perfect. How's that sound when we hook everything up? So you can make the attack more drastic by setting the middle two values lower. So now you have just more attack. Okay, so this is our basic envelope idea. And later we'll get into a variable envelope and different ideas like that. But for right now, this is all you need to know. So to recap, the envelope is run through a v-line tilde. We can control the v-line tilde using a message box. And the message box is made up of three values. The first value is the value that will be eventually output. Bless me. The second value is the time in milliseconds. And that's the time that you're going to use to ramp up. And value 3 is the time that you wait before you send the message. And that's also in milliseconds. I hope that starts giving people some ideas for sounds or ideas that they want to do. This has been Frank Valente's computer music tutorial. I hope to see you next week.